Guys, it's me, Mrs. Vogel here for Ruby Holler for today. I believe we're on day 12. Yesterday we read 2 chapters. Chapter 24 was called Tiller and Sari. We learned a little bit about their daughter, Lucy, who just happened to get really sick. And come to find out, she only got really sick from, do you remember? Orange popsicles. Good job. We also learned a little bit about Sari's trip to New York, and it wasn't all it was cracked up to be, was it? Tiller kind of made her come back to reality a little bit when he sent her postcards every day, since she sent him away. But he sent her postcards every day to remind her of the wonderful place that she had left. And then we read The Holler at Night. And The Holler at Night sounds a little bit creepy, y'all. I don't know about you, but made me a little creeped out to think about rat things flying in. And what were those rat things? You guys have any idea what she was talking about? Bats? Yeah. So she's kind of freaked out about that. They had the rocks under their backs, couldn't sleep, heard noises, were scared of things that, could possibly be creeping into them at night. So they tried to stay up as long as they could. And we also learned about the creepy dreeps and the Bridgertons, a couple of the places that they had gone to live while they were in the home, and they just were not good living situations. So the fact that they are where they are today is pretty impressive, isn't it? So we are going to start today with chapter 26 called Shack Talk. It was dark in Boxton, and Mr. Trepid was in his hideaway shack in the alley. With him was a man who was only known as Z. Mr. Trepid thought of Z as a shiftless man slipping in and out like a slithery possum. Mr. Trepid did not like either the smell of the man or the looks of him. The matted hair, shiny with grease, the rumpled frayed clothes, thick with grime, the cloudy green eyes behind their half-closed lids. But what he did like about Z was that Z would do whatever Mr. Trepid had asked him to do, as long as money was involved. Mr. Trepid did not know where Z lived, nor did he want to know. He wanted to know as little about the man as possible. On this cool summer night, all he wanted to know was if Z could get him some information, if he could take on a project just down in the holler. "Depends," Z said, "on what I gotta do and how hard I gotta work to do it." He slid his fingers through his gnarled hair, tugging at a knot. "And it depends on the, I know, Mr. Trepid had said, "the salary." He pulled a wad of bills out of his pocket. "Now, this here is for the first part, finding out when they're leaving town. That should be simple enough." Mr. Trepid shoved the bills at Z. Z looked over the money. "I don't know about it being so simple." Mr. Trepid shoved some more money at Z. "There, I'm sure that will be quite enough for your efforts." Z smiled, and as he did so, Mr. Trepid turned away from all his crooked teeth. "What about the second part? The surveying part? And what is it exactly I've got to survey?" "When you get me the first part of the information, we will discuss the second part in more detail." Mr. Trepid opened the door, indicating that it was time for Z to leave. "Whatever you say, boss," Z said, and he slipped out of the door, down the alley, and across the railroad tracks, disappearing into the trees on the far side. When Mr. Trepid was sure that Z was gone, he closed the door of the shack and paced inside, back and forth across its tiny interior. He pressed his fingers to his lips. An adventure, he thought. An adventure in Ruby Holler. Chapter 27. Trials. Burrowed deep inside her sleeping bag, Florida wondered if it was morning yet. Her stomach felt like a pitiful, empty sack. She'd been hungry last night when they were scrambling through the woods, and she'd been hungry when they stopped for the night. But she'd been too afraid to mention it because she hadn't remembered to pack any food. What if it had been her job to pack the food? Dallas was twisted upside down in his sleeping bag. He'd gotten out of it in the middle of the night and crawled in head first and then twisted the opening around his feet. He figured that if any rat things tried to get to him, they'd have to get his feet first. And he'd wake up if that happened, and be able to kick those rat things. He didn't want them messing with his face. Lord, he was hungry. It was a bad thing he decided getting used to all that great food that Tiller and Sari heaped on the table. And that was all he could think of. Before he'd come to Sari and Tiller's, he'd been able to go a couple days without food. You just turned your stomach off. You turned your brain off. You moved a little slower. But now he was hungry, and he was mad at himself for forgetting to pack food. And he was mad at himself for forgetting or wondering when Florida was going to mention it. When Florida heard Dallas moving around, she unwrapped her head and blinked at the soft gray light sifting down through a gap in the leaves overhead. She loved the smell out there of earth and bark and pine and... What was that other smell? That delicious smell. She leaped out of her sleeping bag as Dallas came out of his feet first. Dallas! He was ready for her. I know. Don't start on me. The reason I didn't pack any food was because, Dallas, take a whiff. What do you smell? Trees. I smell trees and... Oh, hey, what's that other smell? Florida inhaled deeply. Either I'm out of my noodle, or else that's bacon I smell, Dallas. Bacon. It can't be bacon. It must be something that smells like bacon, and I wish it didn't because it's making my stomach wake up. And my stomach is saying it wants food right now, right this minute. He sniffed the air again. It does smell an awful lot like bacon. Maybe it's some old codger who's living in the woods and he's making his breakfast. And maybe it's some convict who just as soon shoot us as feed us. Why'd you go and say that for? 'Cause it might be true. Let's be quiet. They set off through the trees slowly, quietly. Oh, the smell of frying bacon drew them on closer and closer. Out of the brush came a booming, "Hey there!" Dallas and Florida leapt toward each other. Tiller? Is that you, Tiller? Or am I dreaming? Howdy, kids. Didn't mean to scare you. I was just out here getting some more kindling for the fire. Follow me. Tiller led them through a clump of bushes, and there, on the other side, was Sari seated on a flat gray stone. Her hand stretched toward a big black skillet full of bacon. There you are! Morning! Florida leaned toward Dallas. We're dreaming, right? We died in the middle of the night. Now we're dead and our dead brains are dreaming, right? Sari handed her tongs to Tiller so that he could take over frying the bacon. You two are about the smartest kids I ever met. Coming up with such a good idea to try out our equipment before we set off on our trips. I don't know why we didn't think of that ourselves, do you, Tiller? But how did you know we were gone? And how did you know where we were? How'd you find us? Oh, I couldn't sleep. And so I went up to check on you like I do every night. You been checking on us? Every night? Sari looked a little sheepish. Oh, it's a mother thing. Kids in the house, I check on them. When I saw you were gone, I figured you all must have went out to try those sleeping bags and stuff. I thought it was the most brilliant idea. So me and Taylor, we decided to join you. But how'd you find us? I mean, not that we were hiding or anything, but... Oh, Sari has a nose for where kids go. And then, when we saw where you were camping, we went back and got some food in the skillet because when y'all be hungry this morning, you ready to eat? Tiller passed around 10 plates, which Sari heaped with eggs and bacon and warm biscuits. Anyone want honey? Accepting a generous spoonful, Dallas said, I suppose we should have told you where we were going. Out in the woods to try our things like we said. We probably should have told you that. How called to do that? I can see what you were thinking. You were thinking, let's not disturb Tiller and Sari. Let's just try out this stuff without bothering anybody. Kids ought to have a little choice, that's what I think. They ought to be able to do stuff without someone watching over their shoulders every minute. Florida licked the honey from her fingers. Well, ma'am, that's a mighty interesting way to think. So, what's the verdict? Think those sleeping bags work okay? Well, we think maybe the sleeping bag should have some sort of over-the-head part. Like what? Something to keep out the crawly bugs. Ah, now that's a brilliant observation. We've got some mosquito netting, and I could sew some of that around the top and find a way to fasten it so you could open and close it. Tiller waved his hand in the air. You're not gonna make it too loopy and fancy, are you? I don't want a bunch of lace or anything around my head. Maybe you won't have anything whatsoever over your head. Maybe we'll let the bugs get you. She turned to Dallas and Florida. Anything else you can think of while you were trying out the equipment? Yeah, I was thinking we ought to be sure we have enough food, in case we get stuck somewhere or lost or... Yeah, I can hardly think without food in my stomach. We didn't plan too much about food yet. I'm sure glad you two had this genius idea to make this trial run. Oh, it was nothing. While Dallas and Florida went back to get their sleeping bags, Tiller and Sari packed up the breakfast things. Well, how'd I do? You did fine. Only 'cause I kept my mouth pretty much shut. Keeps you out of trouble. And I guess you were right. They weren't out here stealing our money like I thought. Well, of course they weren't. And I guess you were right, too, about them running away. Sari stood with her hands on her hip. I don't know what got into him. I really don't. Are you sure you didn't say anything to scare him off? And I've been on my best behavior. Honest. I'm just glad we found them. I don't know what I would have done if we hadn't. Sari pressed her hand against the middle of her back. Sleeping on the ground isn't so easy anymore, is it? Nope. Sari gathered up the pans. Now look, Tiller, you be extra nice to those kids, you hear? Tiller bowed. Yes, ma'am, whatever you say. I mean it. I know you do. And I will try my best to become Mr. Personality. The last chapter we're going to read today is Mrs. Trepid, chapter 28. Mrs. Trepid was standing by her bedroom window, staring at 2 empty trash cans rolling around the curb. Clink, clink, clink. She wished someone would pick up those cans and stop that annoying noise. Clink, clink, clink. A young woman walked past, her arms swinging loosely, oblivious to the clanking trash cans. Look at her, walking along without a care in the world. She wanted to throw something at the woman, to jolt her out of her pretty little dream world. Mrs. Trepid's gaze shifted to the porch below. It was on that same porch that the twins had first appeared in a box. She'd never seen the woman who left them. From this very window where she stood now, Mrs. Trepid had spotted the woman, bundled in a tattered and faded green dress, bending over the box. The woman had leaned down so close to the box, and then she had rushed down the walk, her hands pressed to her face. And then Morgan called up to the stairs to say that it was babies in a box, 2 babies, twins. Mrs. Trepid talked to her husband into ripping up the forms that they were supposed to submit to the authorities, reporting the twins' arrival. let's not tell yet. Maybe these could be our babies. The more she thought about that, the more she feared that the woman in the tattered green dress would return them and claim them. When Mrs. Trepid was out walking the babies in the buggy, she would always watch, terrified that that woman would appear and snatch their twins away. When people came to the home to meet the other children, Mrs. Trepid tried to keep the twins hidden. Once, when a couple saw the twins and inquired about them, Mrs. Trepid said, "They're already taken." Even as infants, Florida was the squirmy one, and Dallas was the quieter, dreamier one. Mrs. Trepid was intrigued by the way they'd clung to each other, and the way they responded to each other's gurgles, and the way they reached for each other when they were separated. Two babies who came into this world at the same time. Sometimes Mrs. Trepid felt a little jealous of them. They'll always have each other. They'll always have one person who understands them completely. At first, Mrs. Trepid didn't want Morgan or Mr. Trepid to help care for the twins. She wanted to do it all herself. But she had so little patience, and always one of them needed attention, and she hated when they howled and squirmed. So much trouble every single day. She started wishing the woman in the tattered green dress would come back and claim her twins. After one particularly trying day, Mrs. Trepid snared her husband. "File the forms. Tell the authorities that these twins are available and they have just arrived." To her surprise, though, people were wary of taking on twins. Twins, they would say? Who would want to take two at once? Lovely idea, but no thanks. By the time the twins were toddlers, Mrs. Trepid couldn't bear their stumbling and falling and screaming and banging and breaking and spitting. Everything they did was louder and messier than what the other kids did, or at least that's how it seemed to Mrs. Trepid. Now, as she stood at the window looking down on the street, Mrs. Trepid thought about all the long years ahead and wondered how could she live through more children and more running and more spitting and banging and leaving. Clank, clank, clank. The garbage cans bashed against the curb below. Mrs. Trepid leaned out of the window. "Somebody pick those up," she pleaded. "They're driving me crazy." So guys, that's it for today. Just a few questions. Why do you think Mrs. Trepid was actually really excited about having twins there for a while? I mean, she owns an orphanage where there's kids all the time. Why do you think she wanted to claim those two? Especially when she's so tentative about kids in the first place. What about the Z guy? What do you think about him? A guy that Mr. Trepid is meeting with to do some of his tough deeds in the holler. What do you think that deed is? Do you remember from a previous chapter some clues that we read that might lead you to believe that it's up to no good? Okay. And what about Sari and Tiller? They've been really forgiving thus far. What do you think is going on in their head? And why do you think they think that Florida and Dallas did run away? Till next time, guys, I can't wait to see you tomorrow. Bye.